You're listening to the Casting Shadows podcast. This is a bonus episode of the Casting Shadows podcast, but before you get too excited, this is a bonus episode that is being created from the steaming ashes of whatever it was I was trying to create. And not only that, the main portion of this episode, really everything that this episode is, was recorded in the car. And so, well, it has a certain mobile quality to it. I hope that that won't detract from your ability to engage with the information. I won't say enjoyment, but I hope that won't detract too much from your listening experience as you dive into this first of two Reflections from the Road bonus episodes. This one, well, a lot has happened since this episode was started and not fully realized, but rather than lose what was begun, we're going to release it as a bonus episode, sort of a bonus episode for Cerebrevore, where I was one of the guests and we talked about running serious horror games. This episode isn't really about running horror games. It's more about going for a certain kind of atmosphere. But rather than talk about it before I talk about it, let's just talk about it. Okay, let's build a little bit on what we talked about in Cerebrevore, when we talked about serious horror. Now, one of the examples, an example that I particularly liked, was to take a movie. The movie was Predator, in this case, and consider what would be necessary to recreate that kind of viewing experience, but in the fully participatory format that is a role-playing game. So to be clear, I'm not talking about how do we stat out Predator for a role-playing game one-shot or experience. And I'm not talking about making a script at all, really. What I do want to talk about is the techniques that you might consider using to help facilitate the kind of emotional reactions for the players to appreciate in their characters and or in themselves, depending on how much bleed back and forth between the player and the character is enjoyed or is going on or is allowed in your group. Right? What do we have to do in order to facilitate an experience like what we can see in Predator? So we're using the film Predator in this example, not as a format for an adventure or a mission, but rather as an exploration of elements that can be achieved in our appreciation of the ideas of what a character might go through. Right. All right. And hopefully, one thing that can be communicated at this time will be at least two different perspectives on how to do this, or how this takes place, or how this might be experienced. All right, so let's begin. Let's begin with an overview of the basic events of Predator. The film opens with our introduction of characters and our learning about the mission. And grudgingly, not grudgingly, whatever, the mission is accepted, and we wind up in this very thick jungle. We get lots of commentary about the jungle, we get to see the jungle, and we experience our first taste of an horrific event, right? The characters know the victims, and the method by which the victims were dispatched is truly shocking, unsettling, unnerving. And this begins the effect of real fear on the characters. Not professional alertness, right? Not situational awareness, but it makes them feel something that maybe they haven't felt in a long time, like fear of the enemy, right? They've gone from being very confident, highly trained, well-equipped to thinking maybe we've bitten off, more than we can chew. What is this? They don't have an answer for who or what would do this thing. Right? There's fragmentation within the group. And then, of course, because it's this kind of film, there are deaths. And the horrific nature of the deaths and the mysterious nature of the violent incidents helps to enhance that sense of fear. And then we wind up, because it's a movie, with a showdown, and because it's an 80s action movie, it winds up with a one-on-one showdown, right, with this thing. One of the things that Predator has going for it is that it's not exactly a victory how it ends. Okay, so that's a brief overview, right? Because we're not preparing for an adventure, we're not talking about things like slowly increasing the difficulty of encounters, or how many encounters there should be, or what kind of encounters there should be, or even encounters at all. Instead, we're talking about the emotional life of the film. Because what makes horror play different from adventure play is the tone. So it's just the tone from Predator that we're looking for. And what are the things that affect the tone? They don't want to go on the mission. They don't really trust the person that they're going with. They certainly don't want to take that person with them. They feel like they're being lied to. They arrive in this terrible place and they discover that people that they know very well and respect are dead. Horrifically, right? And this unsettles them. And this is, I guess, a primary point that I'd like to look at, in that there are many types of fear. There are many types of emotion. There are many types of emotional reaction to situations. What type of fear are we actually going for? Are we more interested in building an increasing sense of dread or anticipation, resistance to, or not wanting something to happen in the future, right? We feel safe now, and we want that safeness to continue, and we're very worried about the erosion of that safety as we move forward in time, right? In fact, we would like very much to get away before whatever we worry is going to happen happens. Is that the kind of feeling that we want to engender with our play? Or do we want people to be uncomfortable with their present situation, right? To want to get away from it. They're made to feel uncomfortable, maybe to a small degree or to a large degree, right? They are maneuvering through something which is causing them fear right now. Those are two different flavors of fear, as it were. And which one do we want to focus on, and how can we get there? How can we build that sense of we really need to get out of this jungle in the case of Predator? Or how can we instead choose to focus on the thing that's out there that's hunting them, right? What are the techniques that are going to bring those about? So let's take a look at that. All right, so while we're in play, we have to recognize that the players are sitting in chairs, maybe around a table, or they're sitting in computer chairs looking at a video screen, right? Those are two very different situations. The sitting together in one room has the capacity to be a more immersive experience by virtue of, the group nature of it. We're all there. We're all gathered in one place. We've all decided to do a thing. We are directly connected to body language in a way that the screens, fail to deliver on. But I just said more immersive. Not one is immersive and one isn't. It's harder to get that experience through the screen. But things that can be done are to have folks set their cameras farther back than they might normally. Not their microphones, mind you, but their cameras, so that more of them can be seen. As long as we can see our fellow players, maybe from the waist up, and we can see most of their arm movements, and we can see all of their head and facial movements, then this is significantly better than just having the face. So, how do we bring about this sense of fear in the moment, right? Our choice of tense can matter. Our choice of pronouns can matter, right? Are we talking to you? And who really is you in that situation? Is you the character, or is you the player? Does the player have a sense that when you say you are talking to them? Does the player have a sense that when you say you are meaning the character? Or does the player have a sense that there is an intentional ambiguity, that you is, well, you, the player, and the character? The Game Master, of course, won't be talking to the character, but they will be talking to the embodiment of the character by the player, rather than the player as the player. Or are names being used, right? Let's say the player's playing a character named Jimbo, and you say, as Jimbo walks across the room, as Jimbo slides through the jungle, right? As Jimbo reloads his weapon, what have you done? Right? That specific phrasing has an effect. What is the effect? The effect is that it separates the player from the character. It separates all of us from the character. We are outside that character and we are observing it. We're talking about the character in the third person as Jimbo does the thing. You should be thinking about what Jimbo should do, not what you should do, right? Not what I want to do, right? But we are, by this choice of language, separated. If we want to make it easier for players to let go and feel that fear, in a sense, or at least appreciate the situation as being fearful, whatever variety of fear that we're looking at, one of the methods which can work, or one of the methods which can develop into a working relationship, is to address people as the character, right? That when actions are undertaken, they're undertaken in the first person, right? I do this. And of course, that's met with, you see this, hear this, smell this, touch this, taste this, right? The second step in that direction is to avoid, if possible, and avoid completely if possible, telling them what they do. Now, sometimes it's necessary to recap what everyone has done. Like if you sense that people are drifting, if you sense that someone didn't hear where everybody is or what everybody's saying that they're doing, like, I go over to the large tree and I'm, trying to lift the dead pig to see what killed it. And, I'm scanning the perimeter and I'm reloading the big gun. If we sense that people aren't really aware of what's going on, we might have to do a recap, but we can again do that immersively, like, while you are doing this and while you are doing that and while, and we can learn to grab onto that as an immersive tool. And here we're speaking of immersion in character. There are other types of immersion, but they are perhaps less relevant to this first version of our discussion of Predator. We'll get to them later on. So we are addressing people directly. We're putting them with our language, with our use of language, into the role of the character. We're putting them in the shoes of the character. And so we're trying to give them information in the form of their senses, what they can gather with their senses, and maybe what they might be able to put together in the back of their mind. Not their conscious thoughts, not their decision process, right? Not their deductions, not their reasoning, but with their common knowledge, with their common sense, and with the workings of their subconscious, right? The questions that are raised by observation, the worries that they might have, that sort of thing. We're not telling them that they are afraid. We are helping them notice. We are helping them detect. We are helping them recognize connections between pieces of information that we are trying to help them imagine, help them conceive of, help them immerse in. Right? I think one of the big cardinal sins that a lot of players can see as such is when the game master tells them how their character is feeling or what their character is doing. Right? If that's going on, then a lot of people can rightly feel like, why am I here? Now, some groups react very positively to this because they see it as collaboration. They want to hear about the cool stuff that their character is doing. But this, in horror, in my experience, can be one of those things which allows for greater separation between the player and the experience, and therefore diminishes that special quality of the horror game, which is that sense of activation, that sense of unease, which is so difficult to achieve, especially with strangers, especially with new people. There's all kinds of things that get in the way. What we're trying to do is minimize the things which get in the way. All right, so let's recap a little bit. We speak in the first person. I do this. We're responded to by the game master, right, as you as the character, right? The game master is describing things as best they can in terms of the character's senses and the character's understanding, the character's training, that sort of stuff. They're not giving the players thoughts, but they are supporting the experience of being that type of character in that type of place, helping the player not ask out of character questions, right? By supplying the necessary context as just part of the normal flow. Things that wouldn't be conscious thought for the character are fair game for the game master. Right? So for example, let's say there's an enemy combatant in view and they are holding some kind of weapon. It can be a decision by the game master, right, to describe, he's got a gun, right? And some players want to know what kind of gun. The game master doesn't particularly care, let's say, so that's why they've said he's got a gun. So then this can turn into a role. And so now, instead of playing a horror game and feeling horror and anticipation and fear about, what this delay of possible combat is, going to cost the group, instead, we're having a roll to see if this military type can recognize the weapon that's being used against them. So then they figure out what the roll is, and they make the roll, and they determine whether or not it was a success or a failure. Then they're told what the gun is, and we've spent a not insignificant amount of time focused on what the gun is, versus the game master communicating the information that matters. Maybe they don't care exactly what brand the gun is, right? But they have equipped an NPC with a certain type of firearm, which is going to do a certain amount of damage, to pose a certain amount of threat. These are well-equipped rebels, or these are poorly equipped rebels. So, the man has a musket versus a man has, some kind of submachine gun. So this important information can be communicated, right? He has a one-shot weapon. He has a submachine gun. He has a machine pistol. He's well armed. It's a new weapon, right? It's a rapid-fire weapon. There are all kinds of just little pieces of information that can be delivered just almost subliminally into the description, so that the player gets the information that they need to make a good tactical decision, if that's necessary, but they also get that immersive feeling of knowing what they're looking at, right? Or they get the immersive feeling of not knowing what they're looking at, right? And this can be handled, as I said, by trying to think of the description as what a person in that situation could actually sense, rather than a convenient way of communicating to the player, right? And we hear about this in all sorts of circles, all sorts of games, like don't tell them what the creature is. Common behavior in Call of Cthulhu games is to, when you're a beginner with it, to say something like, you see a ghoul. And instead of describing, you see, this figure in the shadows, right? And, of course, we can go all the way back to our early D&D play, and, a budding dungeon master is sitting there, with the monster manual open in their lap, desperately looking for the particular monster that they need, and, just are overtaxed with trying to run the system and trying to remember the module that's being run and everything like that, and they just wind up saying, like, you see a bugbear, and there's no description or drama or interaction in that scene. It's purely mechanical, and this is something that we always want to avoid if we're going for some particular type of tone, like horror. So one of the elements of description there, to finish this off, is that sense of describing things as known that the character should know, and not rolling for lore and rolling for knowledge and that sort of stuff just to see if the character knows. This can be disruptive. The rule that it's fun to roll dice still has a context, right? It's fun to roll dice when it's fun to roll dice. But let's flip this around. Let's take a look at Predator from a completely different point of view, not the in-character experience, right? But rather one where we are trying to orchestrate a one-shot, where we want to demonstrate the system, where we want the players to leave having had a sense that, horror was had, right? We have a lot of goals going on, and horror is just one of them, right? We want to demonstrate the system. We want to have a one-shot. We want to complete it in one shot. And we start thinking about things in terms of constructing a story. What are the elements of story? Not the elements of experience, which we were talking about before, and how to create that experience at the table, right? But rather, how can we provide the story, right? So then we need to approach Predator very differently. We might say, I don't know, because we're playing a horror game, if the characters will, if the players will agree to have their characters go on this mission. They might decide to refuse it. So instead, we'll start in the jungle, right? Also, I'm not sure I can finish all of this. I don't know how much role play there will be as they are given the mission. And I don't know how much time that will burn and stuff like that. And I want to make sure we get to the end. So let's start in the jungle, right? If we're dealing with simply wanting to experience the characters, to have an immersive experience with these characters, and it doesn't matter where we play them. It doesn't matter what the beginning part is. It doesn't really matter what the ending part is. What matters is the experience, because we're not focusing on creating a story. We're focusing on making it possible to experience the experience. So, when we start making our decisions on this level of story, then we start giving ourselves more control over what happens in play. This isn't a bad thing. This just is a thing. It's the effect of how we are running the game. How are we running the game? We have decided that we need to have a certain number of events, right? Certain types of events, which will bring us from a beginning feeling through a we're in the thick of things now middle feeling to a conclusion feeling. Right? So we're in the jungle, we start experiencing scary things, right? We have a whole list of scary things that can be presented, and we'll use as many or as few of those as we need to get that sense of agitation that we're going for, and to start using the game mechanics that apply stress or sanity loss or whatever to the characters. And this represents that feeling of horror, and the characters, experience can be described, and people can thrill to your descriptive powers. But for the players, it's more the sense of the capability or competence of their character is being eroded by the experiences that they're having. And so when we reach that point where people are really starting to worry if they'll be able to complete the one shot or if they're all going to die, then we segue into our ending material, right? They confront the creature, or they can't get out of the haunted house, or in the case of Predator, they're being hunted. And one by one, they start to fall. All right, so this is a methodology that's employed pretty regularly in Alien, the role-playing game, which we've been talking about a lot this season, and for its cinematic mode, right? It might be expected that, very few, if any, of the characters survive all the way through to the end. And so for a one-shot of Predator, where we want to emulate this kind of fiction, where we're not going to go so far as to make one of the characters tougher, right? Like, you get to play this very competent character, the Arnold Schwarzenegger character, and the rest of you get to play normal folk. We don't need to actually do that, because we have given ourselves more control over the story, right? Now, these two types of experiences can be very fun. These two types of experiences can produce some, great stories from the table. And there are people that you play with who wouldn't be able to identify which one that they had been in if they were a player. But the game master definitely has to know which one they're in if they are to, let's say, maximize their effectiveness at producing that particular experience. Right? To try and mix both of them is to put both of them at risk. Right? Things like we won't be able to meet our ending time. Right? Our 1-shot will become a 9-shot or whatever, because we keep, allowing play to be about the moment, right? Of people inhabiting their characters rather than people enjoying the scene and, being ruthless in the cutting from one scene to the next scene and that sort of thing. We can likewise destroy that fragile sense of immersion in character anytime we do anything which interacts directly between the game master as a player and the player as a player. Right? And so if we're playing a system that has different meta currency about how to do certain things like rerolls or the like, if we have that conversation about how we're going to spend the currency and how much currency we're going to spend, or if instead we are asking people to contribute to the scene, like you're going into a bar, what's the name of the bar? You're asking the player what the name of the bar is, or you've got an ability on your sheet that does this. Would you like to use it? Do you think now's an appropriate time to use it, or would you like to save it for later? Like all of these conversations, which are useful and important, have the side effect of breaking people out of their in-character immersion. So that means that to get better at this ephemeral sense of horror, we need to pick a methodology that we want to go for and then try to make that as smooth and comfortable for us as game master as possible, and try to make that experience, whichever one it is, the in-character experience or the collaborating on a story or an overall experience of the session experience, then we need to focus in on that and do that. To go into it without really being aware leads to a blurring of the lines, which leads to unreliable results, let's say. Okay, well, obviously we could go on and on, but rather than have that happen, I invite you to give me a call. You can reach me on SpeakPipe. You can reach me through the original Anchor app, maybe. Or you can contact me via email or try through Discord. My contact details are available on the Anchor webpage and in the description box. Okay, until the next time, in the next bonus episode, take care. You've been listening to the Casting Shadows podcast. Unfortunately, this bonus episode was, as we have mentioned, recorded on the road. Rather than be discarded, has been turned into one of these reflections from the road bonus episodes. We hope you've enjoyed it despite any variance in audio quality, and we hope that you'll join us again, maybe for the second Runeslinger's Reflections from the Road, which should be due in a couple of days. If you'd like to try us out in a different format, you can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/Runeslinger, or using the new system now, you can search there at Runeslinger, all one word. You can find me at castingshadowsblog.com, and well, you've already found me here. Am I in other places? Maybe. You can check the Anchor page for this podcast, anchor.fm/Runeslinger, or you can check on Discord. And in any of the episode descriptions, there'll be contact information. But anyway, thanks for listening, and take care.